Hi, Paul. How's it going?
Good day. Not too bad.
Uh, Paul, thank you for doing this on a Friday afternoon for yourself.
Well,
You
being mainly retired, that's quite all right.
That's okay. I'm sure even in retirement, we all have things to do, but so I appreciate it nevertheless. Um, I Before we start, I obviously want to give people a little bit more of a background in who you are. People who may not know much about Paul Catmur will might see the title that says ex-adman and writer, but I think that probably doesn't paint the full picture. And understanding why someone like yourself is quite a nice conversation to be having for the type of people hopefully are going to be watching this. So indulge me for a few minutes while I do that. Um, I guess first and foremost, Paul Catmur, although it says at the bottom of your poster, Auckland, you are originally from the UK. You moved across to New Zealand, which has been your home for the last 25 plus years now. I think you moved across to take over as ECD at DDB at the time in
I
Auckland.
didn't actually take over as ECD. I came over as a writer.
Oh, okay. I did not know that. Okay, but you had come across in the 2000 in the year 2000,
Yep.
and within that role, which I think spanned at least 6 years, you had been ECD, CCO, regional head for APAC,
Yep.
and after that, you went on to start co-found your own agency, BCNF, Barnes Catmer and Friends.
There was actually
And
a year in the middle of when I went to work for George Patterson Y&R in Melbourne.
yes, that's right. You had in between. You went to Australia for a year. I do
Yep.
recall reading that. In fact, while I was stalking your bio a little bit, I did scroll all the way down to the bottom. Just when I got to the before the London bit, I did notice that you had spent some time in casinos.
Correct.
We may or may not need to bring that in as to your learnings from that. Anyways, as I was saying, so BCNF with Dentsu later obviously coming on board. I think your
Yep.
time with BCNF spanned around 13 years. The point being, it's Ex-Adman probably doesn't do it justice. I think you spent a lot of time at both local levels across a few different countries, and that's probably going to be painting a lot of the opinions you'll be sharing with us here today.
Yep.
After 2022 is I think when you got out of the ad game. You had gone back to calling yourself the writer and working with everything from the New Zealand Herald to online publications like Stuff. In fact, you were in the US recently, right, for the World Cup.
Yep. Yep.
So that's kind of nice. And more excitingly, or most excitingly, at least for me, thinking when I kind of came across, hey, I should really talk to Paul Catmer, was you had released a book. I think it came out in Christmas just last year,
Yep.
um,
Yep.
called The Gutter Bar, which is a fictional book uh, based, I suppose, about the life of an ad man, not just about things within advertising, but of course, there's like a character arc there, which is interesting in the sense where I think that might um, the fact that after 2022, when you had left advertising, when you sat down to write the book, uh, it may have forced you to start thinking about the career that was and what advertising is and how it sometimes manifests behind the scenes, in front of the scenes. And I'm assuming the book was more about that.
Well, I'm very disappointed, Zaid. It's funny. It's a satire. Yeah, there were certain elements of advertising that I found a bit silly and yeah, a bit overblown, and I wanted to poke some fun at them. Um, so yeah, that's why I wrote it.
Did the book start off as something you wanted to write about, with the main character being a person in advertising only because it was from your life? Was that always the case?
I wanted to write a satire about advertising. I wanted to, yeah, as I say, I wanted to poke fun at some of the absurdities of the business that don't quite make sense. So it's a kind of love hate tribute to advertising. I had a great time had a great time doing it, but there were also some aspects of it that I just found a bit daft.
Okay. I hope we can inject more of that as we go on with the conversation. Hopefully, naturally falls into it, and please do, because obviously you know the subject matter more than I do. But look,
Yeah.
since let's start with something broad. I mean, everything we're really going to be talking about is related to the industry, I suppose. But let's start with something a little bit more broad. And with every guest, I try to find something a little bit different on what's an interesting angle in which to bring in a person's opinion through their experience. And in your case, it's very interesting. You're the first person, besides the fact that you're the first person I've talked to who is a retired ad man, the fact that when Dentsu took over after you guys left with BCNF, you left in 2022, and a rare occasion to talk to someone who left the advertising game before
Before he was
ChatGPT.
kicked out.
Well, before AI, really. I mean, the fact, and
Yeah.
you know what I mean. The fact that we've talked a few times before this, and you had mentioned, look, I'm happy to talk about the state of what's happening in the industry and things like that, but you have to also understand I haven't been part of the industry for quite some time, and I think that's a great thing because my first question, really, and let's get the ball rolling, is what did you think of where advertising was at that point when you had left, which is before AI, the subject matter that otherwise dominates headlines with how the industry is
Yeah.
going?
Okay. Okay. So yeah, I've never had to. Um, yeah, I remember a senior advertising guy in the year 2000 talking about the rise of the internet and the digital world, and someone said to him, how do you think it will affect you in your job when it comes in? And he said, hopefully, I'll be retired by then. And I kind of felt the same about AI. It was, I mean, it didn't exist. It was just something that you read about maybe in Wired when I left, and it was no issue. It is a tool. There's so many new inventions and technology have come into the business over the years. Digital sound, digital film, um, and there's always resistance to them. But then people start to that they're not find that they're not going to go away, and they have to make the best of them. And I think that's just the same with AI. There's a lot of railing about it and how it's killing creativity and the rise of the robots. It's like, well, that's fine, but it's not going to be uninvented. So make the best of it that you will. Don't lock yourself in a cupboard and put a bag over your head and say, AI is just nonsense. I don't want to have anything to do with it, because it's there.
No, you're absolutely right about how we should be embracing the technology. I suppose what I was trying to understand more from your point of view was because you didn't have that particular technology uh, to contend with, to deal with, to look at how it was changing the industry. I think I was trying for us to talk more about where did you see the arc of where advertising was when you had started, like you said, in 1990, leading up to the point where you had left, because the business had obviously changed. We were all seeing it. I mean, I haven't been working for as long as that, but even I have noticed a change even within my career span. How are
Yeah, well,
you seeing it changing?
the arc has been downward. Advertising used to be like a magic box that clients didn't really understand what went on. They would come along and ask you to sell more of their kids' cereal or beer or pizza or whatever, and the agencies would there was a leap of faith. The agencies would come back with a suggestion of how to do it, and lo and behold, it worked. I mean, it worked mainly because you put anything in those days. You put anything on TV, and it would sell, whatever the ad, and the better the ad was, the more it would sell. And the clients didn't really know what happened in that black box. That some kind of magic dust was sprinkled and it came out. But since then, the lid has been lifted off that box. The democratization of creativity has allowed anybody to do anything, and the advertising has consequently been devalued for that, amongst other reasons. The proliferation of media, the proliferation of different media outlets. It's not just TV. You know, it used to be TV and radio and you know, the billboard here and there, and press was massively, and it yeah, it's changed so much that yeah, anyone with a camera and a YouTube channel can basically be their own advertising agency.
Yeah, and again, so even at that point before 2022, that was already there. Those changes were already happening. Digital advertising obviously had been there since around the time you had moved to New Zealand anyway. So, although from what I recall, it was more of a segregated part of the agency, but it was there. You had small digital agencies, but for the most part, traditional, if we can call it, agencies were siloed from the other.
Yeah, there were a lot of charlatans about in those days. And if you had digital in your title, people thought that you were a genius, and they go and set up their own agencies. And sooner or later, the big networks reached out a big paw and said, "Well, no, you might as well come in with us." And the idea of creativity, the media doesn't matter. The medium doesn't matter so much. If you have a good idea, you can utilize that media to make the most of it. But if you don't have a good idea, it's probably not going to work in the first place.
Yeah, I mean, you mentioned media in the context of digital advertising, and as what you've just mentioned reminded me that we should probably mention, for those of us, those are the people who are not old enough to know this part of advertising. But there was a point where certainly big network agencies, at that time, media was part of the big network agency models, and then they had kind of gone their separate ways. I don't actually know what had happened, because this was even before my time. They had separated from the P&L of the agency, right? They had separated and gone in their own ways. How do you think that
they were different companies? I mean, now most of you have a media agency and you have a creative agency, if you like, within the same holding company. But when the media agencies originally broke away, they were independents. I think there were guys who worked in media like, media is really easy compared to creative, and they could make a lot of money selling
time and space.
Yeah, right. through TV companies, and it was very profitable. It was relatively low skilled. It was all about relationships and deals. There wasn't wasn't a great deal of thought involved, despite what they might say. I no doubt I'll get into trouble with that. But it was a lot easier than writing campaigns and putting together TV ads. And they went, well, we'll do it. So we're going to go and do it separately, and we'll take all the money for doing that, and we'll also work with many different clients, because if you were say I'm trying to think of an agency that's still going, say they've all closed. Young and Rubicam Advertising, which is where I started, they had their own media department, and you'd work closely or not with them to try and work out the best solution and the best way to reach people. But the media company was limited because it could only have clients that were clients of the agency. So if you had a bank, and the bank wanted to use a separate media company, your agency media company couldn't go and work with another bank. And when they became independent, they could go and work with whoever. They weren't limited by the main holding company.
So generally speaking, would you say that act of separating away from let's say the output-based part of the agency, the creative department-based part of the agency, that decision was made by the media companies themselves at the time? Because I was always under the impression that it was
within the media companies going, media was always kind of the related poor relation of the ugly stepchild of the ed business, and I think they went, no, this is not right. We should we'll go off and make it into a very profitable business, which they did. And then, of course, the agencies went after a while. The holding companies bought back the media company. They kept them separately, but they bought them back so that they could take the profits.
In a make believe version of this particular multiverse, do you think the advertising industry? You mentioned earlier about you've seen the arc in a decline. Do you think in a world where that hadn't happened or that hadn't needed to happen before holding companies realize, holy shit, this is profitable, let's bring it back into the fold, do you think that might have contributed to the journey that we've taken with advertising?
I mean, I think I've always liked working closely with media. I think it's a very important part of it. In a Barnes Catmur Friends, we had our own media department. Sometimes we'd work with ones outside, but we had our own unit there, which was very useful to talk to people and to and fro and to get crossover ideas. And of course that was to a large extent taken away when they split. Is that part of the decline of the industry? Yeah, not really. It made things a bit more awkward. But some industries decline. Industries come and go. The only constant in the universe is change, and advertising was very profitable. And has become less so as it's been chipped away over the decades.
So in that scenario where I was suggesting what would have happened if they hadn't gone their own ways, in a way, I guess I was imagining a world where the P&L of the output part of the agency and the media part of the agency, they kind of relied on each other. While one side of an advertising agency structure might be more influential from a financial sense, I get it. Media is because of the nature in which it was done. But if it was always together, then the all the efforts that were going towards doing well for the agency, it was a combined effort. So media would have cared more about how a good idea is going forward. I agree with you that certainly in the last, I'm going back 25, 30 years, that the typical creative department at a good agency would have been very close with the media company because we used to use it as a, oh my god, this is an opportunity, this is something that hasn't been done, we could use this. And that friendship and relationship you had with the media company really brought some really fucking cool ideas to life, right? It was part of your arsenal. When we
but it was, and it's a shame that it happened, but it didn't, and it made advertising less good and less effective, but it didn't really, I don't think it brought down the industry as a whole. It was a speed bump, but it wasn't an existential threat to the industry.
And and we also have to realize at the time, we're talking about a time in the media landscape where we had a handle on how many mediums we had, as you mentioned, right? You had your press, your radio, your TV, and all that. I wonder, it would have been inevitable anyway because of the fragmentation of how the media has come about. We would never be able to have media look in a way back towards the agency cousins and say, hey, hang on a second, are they not keeping up, in step with what we're doing? It probably was inevitable that it would have branched out in a complete different direction where you don't really think about the outcome or the viability of good ideas. It's all about what you're doing. Wouldn't you say?
You've lost me. What was the question?
with so much fragmentation in media,
Yeah.
it was probably inevitable the power that media has had and has grown over the decades since that divorce from the traditional agency model where everything was together, that it was impossible for them to have agencies keep up with the rate of change.
Yeah, right. Okay. So because the creative departments were kind of staying the same, while media was fragmenting, because the connections weren't as strong between the two elements of the industry, that slowed things down. Yes, definitely. Yeah. So yeah, as the industry was going through a difficult time, the teething troubles of coming to terms with digital, to have had closer relationship between the two arms would have been good. Yes. Sorry. Go on.
No, you're fine. Um, Speaking of relationships, you just brought up relationships. I was actually that was going to be the next topic I wanted to get into. In many ways, when I was asking you about where did you see the state of advertising when you had walked away in 2022, I was also cognizant that New Zealand, in many ways, is a very sheltered version of advertising compared to the rest of the world. In that in this 20-year period, I would say that I have not been working down in New Zealand, Australia, and in a probably more, let's say, competitive, but competitive and maybe in a different sense. I don't mean it in a disparaging way to New Zealand advertising. I think what we've seen outside New Zealand is that breakdown in relationship, or what I would say is a traditional client agency relationships. New Zealand seems to be, maybe because of the size of it, maybe because of how small it is, and the way you get to be close to the clients. Do you think that has played a role in how much work coming out of Australia and New Zealand has always stayed, has been able to maintain a certain level of standard that you don't quite often see anymore anywhere else?
Um, it's one of the reasons. I think, yeah, New Zealand is a very small place. Everybody knows everybody, certainly within the advertising and market circles. The Venn diagram between advertising and marketing is very close. There's a lot of overlap. Relationships are hugely important, and it does help if there's an understanding between between client and agency. Absolutely, absolutely.
And do you feel that that is definitely a novelty now to have in the way that we conduct the typical advertising client agency relationship?
A novelty in New Zealand against the rest of the world.
Correct.
Yeah, it probably still exists. I mean, you'd get it in London as well because London. I would expect it's a lot harder in the States just because of the geographical aspect of it. Um, and also in New Zealand, it tends to be like 90% of it is concentrated in Auckland. Used to be a bit in Wellington. So it used to be bigger in Wellington, but it's now almost all come up to Auckland. In the UK, it's almost all in London. Whereas in the States, you have you have New York and LA, but you have centers of excellence everywhere. And if you're in New York, you can be dealing with clients in in Kentucky or Florida or wherever. So yeah, it'd be a lot harder to maintain those relationships because of the tyranny of geography.
And also the fact that the US probably has 1,000 times more money to go around for advertising. It does make it easier to just pick up a new bedfellow, in even if you're a small little agency in the middle of nowhere.
Yeah, you can. I mean, you can run a business there because well, it's like Australia being 5 times the size of New Zealand. That's fish where the fish are.
Yeah. Let me see. I remember because we've obviously chatted a few times before doing the session properly like this. I recall when we were discussing your book, I had mentioned that the protagonist was, I can't remember how I put it, but it was certainly based on your experience of advertising. And you made a comment. I think you said something along the lines of it was a far more successful ECD or something like that. And you talked about how London advertising is so different. I can't remember where you were going with it, but I thought it would be interesting. Can you tell me what you meant by that?
Yeah, well, so the protagonist Ben Putney in the Gutter Bar is an ECD of a reasonably successful London agency, and you asked if the book was about me, and I was never an ECD of a large London agency. That's why I left London, because I felt that I was working for Y&R London, which at the time was a very unfashionable agency and was shrinking weekly. Yeah, it started when I went there. It was the second biggest agency in London. When I left, it was the 18th, and it was just on a slide the whole time. And it was difficult to get any traction. It was difficult to get work out that I was happy with, and people would get very sniffy from other agencies. If you had BBH or Sarches or at times TBWA or Hal Henry, Childcott Lurie, if you were coming from that agency, people were interested. If you were coming from McCann's or Y&R, people didn't really care. So that's why I left London, because I didn't feel that I could get on. I thought, if you keep running up against a brick wall, then maybe it's time to change and try something different. So I came down to New Zealand.
But it had nothing to do with advertising in New Zealand. It was just that was the destination.
It's funny. Well, marginally. I was in Mike O'Sullivan and I were working as a creative team, and we won best billboard in the Y&R network, and we flew down to Mexico to pick up our awards, and we met a guy who ran the New Zealand arm of Y&R, and he offered us a job, and we went. I went sometime after Mike for various reasons, but Mike came down immediately, and we didn't go, oh, we must go to New Zealand. Someone from New Zealand offered us a job. That was a difference. And I was in Vancouver recently at the World Cup, and Vancouver is quite similar to Auckland. And I was thinking, if that guy that we'd met had been from Y&R Vancouver, then we would have ended up there. It was just, I was going to say serendipity, but it was just luck. It wasn't by design that we ended up in New Zealand. I'm very glad it did, and I love it here and made it my home. But he could have been from a number of different countries, and if he'd offered us a job, we would have ended up there probably.
Yeah, okay. Fair enough. I think I brought it up because at the time, I mean, I mentioned, for those of you who don't know, I also started in New Zealand in advertising. My career rather started in advertising in New Zealand. At the time, with the exception of one ECD, and it was my first ECD. I want to say his first name was John Plimmer, who was ECD of Saatchi's Wellington. Yeah. I'd never seen. I had never. Well, I can't recall any other ECD at the time between Auckland and Wellington, including Clemenger, that had an ECD who was not English. Is that? Do you recall the same?
Yeah. There was a time, which I think has been superseded, when the CDs, the ECDs of the bigger New Zealand agencies were almost all from the UK.
The UK, yeah.
Andy Blood, Nick Worthington, Toby Talbot.
Yourself, Mike O. Yeah.
Yeah, myself and Mike O. Why? Why? I think because not because we were necessarily better creatives, but we'd been trained in the furnace of London, and um, we had the discipline and the understanding of, I guess, advertising theory maybe. Um, in New Zealand, in a small market, you'd kind of develop, you'd be working your own way and doing your own thing, and um, we'd worked in generally in far bigger markets in a far stricter, more disciplined way, and jeepers, I mean, I guess there was an element uh, of of teaching. I don't want to
Well,
get
look, at the end of the day, that's why I was asking whether I understand that it was serendipity. I was wondering because we didn't understand what was happening behind the scenes, why so many ECDs, at least for the people, juniors and the rest coming up in the from the Kiwi school of advertising, we didn't quite understand, and because it was predominantly all English, we thought, of course, there must have been a lifestyle element to it. Well, I assume there was a lifestyle element to it. I know you're a big fishing guy, or you were at least at the time. And I remember you mentioned Maiko. I remember a time when I think Maiko was with Sachi's in Auckland, and then he went to Australia, but then he came back. And whether I read it or I heard it through the grapevine, he New Zealand lifestyle is just really more cut out for Michael Sullivan. I'm assuming your time in Australia, you probably saw the same thing as well. It was less about the advertising; it was more about the life after and in around it.
Yeah, I think we kind of came down for the lifestyle, and what happened was, so you're talking about the early 2000s, I take it, and what happened was, I'm not sure why we had different reasons for coming down. We didn't all come down on the same jumbo. We came down at different times. But New Zealand was kind of like Japan before Madame Butterfly, before Lieutenant Pinkerton turned up, and it was a kind of closed society because there was no internet. Now we take the internet for granted. When we turned up, there was no internet. People who worked in New Zealand advertising knew what went on in New Zealand advertising, and would maybe 6 months after Cannes would find out what had gone on down there, and might have some idea of what had gone on in Australia, but they didn't really, they weren't really in touch with global advertising. So, because I remember, you try and come down and show your book. You had to physically carry your work down from England to New Zealand to show it to anyone. You couldn't go online and see what anyone had done. Then the internet came along, and suddenly someone releases an ad in South Africa or LA or Paris or whatever, and the next day you see it. Coming from London, we were far more aware of what was going on in the rest of the world, and now, of course, it's completely different because everyone in New Zealand can keep up and see what's happening anywhere instantly. But up to 2000, it was far more of a closed industry.
Let's talk a little bit about awards, or rather the strength that New Zealand certainly has, even at a global level. Australia and New Zealand has had this. They're like in a power ranking when it comes to awards and things like that. We're talking about still that's the same last 2 decades, starting from the 2000s.
Yeah.
I was wondering if there was a relationship between these people who learned advertising in that very competitive London field, and then when you guys moved down to New Zealand, and it felt very much, again, looking outside in, where I'm just projecting. I thought, like, here a fraternity of these British admin creative guys who are really good at what they're doing, and was there like a collective, like, this is like this is very fertile. Let's grow this as a nation of agency people. Was there anything like that? Because it felt like that trend didn't quite happen with the migration of creative directors to any other part of the world, as I've noticed it at least.
Well, I mean, Neil French didn't do so badly in Singapore to this. Okay, so a couple of things happened. So a bunch of people came down from London, and we were stymied. We were held back. We knew what. I mean, if we're talking just about awards, we knew what was award-winning work, but we couldn't do it because in London you had to go through so many different layers and so many different clients. And it turned out that in New Zealand, if you had an idea, you could take it to a client and say, "Hey, why don't we, have a dog walking around AOT Square with without anyone holding him, with a lead sticking up, and talk about an ad for the Invisible Man." That was a Colenso thing, and they go, "Oh yeah, okay, we could do that." That didn't happen in London. It would go to 15 committees and discussions and whatever, and by the time it was done, it was too late. So it was if you could do things cheaply enough in New Zealand, you could do anything.
See, that's the thing. I had always assumed that was the reason why so many of these London CDs, ECDs, writers, art directors had come down, because they saw it was a lot more easier to get, the stuff that sits in your journal that you can't sell to a client, and it was a lot easier to do that in New Zealand. That's what I thought a lot of that movement was about.
Yeah, I think most people came down for different reasons. Like I know, like Nick Worthington was married to a Kiwi, and I think Andy Blood at the time was married to a Kiwi. Yeah, maybe Mike O and I. Well, we couldn't get on in London. We were finding it difficult to get out and do what we wanted to do. The other thing that was important to New Zealand's rise in the ranking was, of course, the tyranny of English, which was if you want to win international awards and it's not in English, you're going to find it really, really difficult. It's just the way it is. Yeah, I was on the first ever radio jury at Cannes, and if anybody from outside an English-speaking market wanted to win, they basically had to record it twice in Spanish if they were Mexican, and then do an English version, which on one hand is crazy. On the other hand, what are you going to do? If you want to win, that's the sine qua non.
I don't think we ever quite addressed that. I actually have something along the lines of this topic that I want to talk with you, and I might still get to it later. But I did feel that, as you say, the English speaking world, certainly the awards that were based in the D&ADs and Cannes, the European awards, it felt like it was definitely skewed towards the English speaking world. And again, probably another reason amongst many reasons why the New Zealand market, with the freedom to do a lot more freedom to do a lot of work that would not be challenged as much, that really helped the market with both Australia and New Zealand. I think for whatever has happened, it has really set a very nice DNA for how work still continues to be done in advertising in New Zealand and Australia. And I think I'm very grateful for that. I talked to another a peer of yours, also originally from the UK. He had gone through a few different parts of the world before ending up in Auckland. And he was the first person who ever told me that there was actually a term for rather derogatory one. I'm not going to repeat, for people who couldn't make it in London and had needed to find their success overseas. Was that really a stigma for a lot of British people who were leaving the London ad scene?
Yeah, probably, because London was London was massively arrogant. I mean, some of that arrogance was based on, it had a base in fact that London advertising was very good, but there was a refusal to accept that anything done elsewhere was any good. Generally, even America, the British just looked down at all advertising everywhere, and it's come up. So when I left London, I went to see a headhunter. I think that I was going to go down to New Zealand, and I can't remember if I was talking about a job or talking about doing some freelance or whatever. And she's kind of like, oh, well, of course, if you go down to New Zealand, you're going to find it very hard to come back to London. And I'm like, well, what if I don't want to come back to London? What if I'm quite happy there? And that's not why it's like everything had to be referred back to how it would be considered in London. I really didn't care. If you're not happy with what you're doing, then change it. Do something different. So yeah, it was easier for me to make it in New Zealand than in London, and quite possibly people will look down on that, but it doesn't bother me. I'm just living my life. I probably wouldn't have. Not too many people who stayed in London who ended up as chief creative officer of Asia Pacific. But the great thing about London was they would not, they would rather be a copywriter, a junior copywriter at Saatchi's than CCO of an Asia Pacific network. But that's their loss.
Yeah, I mean, all this talk about the English creative directors, ECDs, coming down and kind of setting the foundation in New Zealand for advertising. In many ways, myself and a few other Kiwis who started in the advertising market left New Zealand for kind of a similar reason. But the reason for myself and at least one other person who was a few years my senior, he's still based in Southeast Asia, we exchanged notes, and he agreed that one of the reasons was that because of the size of the market in New Zealand, all you guys were playing musical chairs between the same agencies. It was going to be very hard. In a way, that's the similarity to London, right? When you say you're running up against a brick wall, when you're at a point when you can see it early on, it's like, wait a minute, these are the strongest ECDs, and they're probably going to be in this market for a long time. We need to go look elsewhere. And I think there's nothing wrong with that. Yeah. But it is something that has happened even with my generation of ad people.
Yes. Yeah. No, it makes sense to do it. Where and how I live has always been very important to me. So, things like weather. I don't want to live somewhere with weather I don't like, which might sound strange, but as I mentioned before, Southeast Asia, the weather in there is too hot and sticky for me. Chicago is too cold for me, but New Zealand hits a good spot. And it's interesting that most of the ECDs who came down and people who ended up as ECDs in New Zealand agencies from the UK, I think they're more or less most of them are still here. Andy Blood's still here, Toby's still here. I think Mike's still here. I'm still here. We're doing Nick Worthington's still here. We're doing different things, but we love New Zealand, and it's not just the advertising that's keeping us here. But yeah, when I came back, I had a year in Melbourne, and when I came back to New Zealand, was faced with the fact that there aren't many jobs for ECDs. There's only like 4 or 5 agencies, and that's part of the reason why I ended up starting Barnes Catmur Friends, because if there's no immediate job had an agent at a big job at New Zealand agency, we'd got to go and start your own.
Let's talk about that. I was going to ask this a bit later on, but BCNF in the last, my understanding of the last 15 years of bigger market, I generally calling agencies which do more billings as bigger markets, right? Like a Singapore or a Hong Kong, that kind of a thing. In places like that, in the last 15 years, you saw a lot of independent agencies come up. Not that there are not independent agencies coming up all the time. What I was seeing as a trend, at least about 15 years ago, maybe now for different reasons, but at the time, a lot of independent agencies were coming up because there was a path to purchase in a way.
Yeah.
Not suggesting that BCNF was created for that reason. You've already mentioned what the impetus was behind creating it. Do you think a lot of independent agencies do it because because at the time there was so much money in the market? Like, we'll just do it ourselves, and if someone's interested, they'll just take it from us. They'll buy us out.
I don't know. There's various reasons to do it. There's various impetuses that lead you to do it. For me, having a big payday at the end of it was, just an aside. I wanted to work. I wanted to put in some of the lessons that I'd learned from working in agencies that were well and badly run, and try and run one well. Special in New Zealand have done an extraordinary job of building not exactly global network, but building a network outside New Zealand. They've done brilliantly, but we and show no signs of selling. Partly maybe because I don't know that anybody would want to buy them. Might be wrong. Because network agencies are difficult things to keep going. But when we started, myself and Daniel and the rest of the guys, when we started, I was 40. Rubbish. I was 48. I was heading towards 50. 48.
Okay.
It's a very stressful, at least I find it so, a very stressful job that you have to work really hard at. And after I've been doing it for 12 years, I don't want to do it anymore. And you have to look at an exit strategy. If you're working for a big agency, there's ways you can kind of calm things down, and you'll probably get fired or get a payoff. But when it's your own agency, there's two exit strategies. One is to get people up to take over from within the agency, and we considered that. And the other is to sell it, and luckily somebody came along at the right time and wanted to buy, and I'm very grateful to them. And I was tired. I wanted to stop, but that wasn't the impetus. The impetus for the agency was not to make a vast amount of money.
Yeah, and I want to apologize to anyone who thinks that I was suggesting that a lot of people who start independent agencies are doing it because they wanted to sell. Certainly 15 years ago. I think what I was saying was, at the time, I noticed that there were a lot of them coming up, and because there was so much buying happening, it was the height of holding companies coming in and taking over markets that they hadn't been in.
Yeah.
It became, it was like a very, I felt, at least looking outside in, like it was a very ugly reason to be doing that. And I understand what you're saying. I wanted to ask a particular question. You said you were tired of it. When you say you were tired, were you tired of running BCNF, or were you tired of advertising in general, or both? Because obviously you didn't go back to advertising after that. So
I kind of both. There's it's like constant stress in advertising, and people go, "Oh, that's not stressful." Yeah, you're being judged hourly for what you do by your peers, by your superiors, by your clients, by the public. So it's like constantly your work is being reviewed, and sometimes yeah, and that can be the fun of it. That can be though. It's like, yeah, I don't know, playing football, playing a sport. You're winning, you're losing, and that's exciting. But yeah, after I've been doing it for 30 years, and advertising was my life, and yeah, I just didn't have the impetus. When people came into my office, and I would look up, and I wouldn't go, "Oh, great, what what wonderful things they're going to show me." It would be, "Oh God, now what?" And yeah, that's not that's not a particularly healthy way to be doing your job. So
And just to clarify for anyone who doesn't know, because even though you are a creative person, at some point you had also taken over as CEO of BCNF, right? So I just want to clarify for anyone who doesn't know that as you keep going, please.
yeah, at some point, I'm not sure how long it lasted for. It was maybe a year, maybe only 6 months. I was CEO and ECD. That was,
Oh, fantastic.
when I say I was CEO, Daniel had left by that point, and we'd already sold to Dentsu, so we were working out the period while they were working out the crossover. So I had Rob Harvey upstairs and had a finance director upstairs who were actually fine. So I couldn't cock things up too much. I was the titular head of the agency, but the big bucks stopped upstairs, to be honest. So,
And I don't get to talk to as many people who have sold their agency to a big network like Dentsu. I have to ask. It's one thing to do ECD and CEO. I can understand with years of experience, you can make that work. It must be very different trying to sell. Luckily, they're the one who came knocking at your doors, but I'm sure the process must be so foreign, even compared to everything else that you would have recognized within an ad agency structure. Or was it not? Was it pretty much, yeah, I get this?
well, I was lucky enough to work um, under Marty O'Halloran at DDB, and part of the learning was going on a course, which was basically how to run an agency.
A
So
literal course.
yeah, yeah, literal course run by Omnicom. I don't know if it's called Omnicom University or that kind of stuff, but yeah, it was going over to. We went over to Sydney for 2 days, a bunch of us, and these guys came down from the States, and basically in 2 days, that's all it took. In 2 days, taught us how to run an agency, and that changed my life. In that I'm like, okay, now I know what I'm supposed to be doing. Because as a creative, all you're trying to do is to get brilliant work out. That's all you care about, and you don't really know. No one teaches you about man management. No one teaches you about the financial side of it. No one teaches you about what it takes for an agency to actually grow. Nobody teaches you. You have decisions to make. How are you going to get to this point? And it was massively useful to me. And I would urge any, if I don't know that it's such a course still exists, but it's so useful if you're ever thinking of running your own place.
Yeah, I think there was a lot more investment, networks investing in its own people. We're not going to go into that than it is nowadays. In the latest iteration of advertising. Look,
Yeah.
we're talking about holding companies and buying and things that happen at big marble tables in New York head offices and the rest of it. Going back now from BCF back to your the first agency which you were a big part of, DDB. You mentioned, you were regional CCO there as well. Uh, in a way, your existence in that network, in that world, for as long as you had, you've obviously been connected to a lot of people behind the scenes that nobody really knows even by name. I recall reading an article the first time I had seen something that came up on your LinkedIn, I think, and it was around the time the DDB brand was all up in the air, and you wrote a very lovely piece about the brand and what it means, and if it does happen, it would be a loss, and this and that. And obviously, we've seen in the last 10 years so many great names have kind of been erased for the sake of, well, I don't know for the sake of what, but I'm sure there's plenty of reasons why they thought it was prudent to do. What do you, and I guess this comes back to the original question at the top of the call, which is, what do you think of the state of advertising? What is the state of advertising with when you've got decisions being made at a global level where you can just do that? You can just kill acronyms that have stood the test of time. What do you think about the way we are dealing with the latest course of action for the industry?
Well, 'twas ever thus. I mean, that's what happened. The glorious name of Barnes, Catmur and Friends was dismissed by the stroke of a pen by Dentsu, but that they paid for the privilege to do that.
Which is different.
DDB was another thing. I was in Washington recently, and I was in the Smithsonian Institute and Smithsonian Museum of I think it was of American culture, because they have a whole bunch of museums there. And I went in, and there's Bill Bernbach in there, a picture of Bernbach, and they talk about the creative revolution. And it was a hugely important thing within the industry, and I was very proud to work for DDB, and I think people were. They thought well of it. They thought it had a great heritage and far more than, say, BBDO or TBWA or McCann's or FCB. But the decisions, the decisions were made by people who didn't share that view, dare I say.
Do you think it's a romantic notion that places like DDB should have been left alone, or not having been made to disappear? Do you think it's a romantic notion that only people in advertising have, or do you think marketing clients, brands care at all about that? Is it just us?
Oh, I don't think people care. You look at JWT, which was maybe the kind of the granddaddy of agencies. Was just squashed out, and it happens. It's life. It's business. People die. Companies die. So it was a shame, but I could kind of understand it, and yeah, it's what happens.
So this is your take, is it just you're just being pragmatic, that this is just inevitable part of business, and we don't hold a responsibility as a collective to make sure that you don't erase 75 years or however many years. I think Weinar was 100, wasn't it? I can't remember now.
Felt like
it. Like, do you not think there is that responsibility, or is it just because, hey, look, time to change? It's we're no longer, and some might argue that because we're no longer in the age of network agencies, and it is about the independent, smaller shops that are not being led by textbook way of running an agency.
Well, Omnicom went to buy IPG,
Yep.
and to convince Wall Street that it was a sensible thing to do because they're worried about the share price more than anything. They needed to rationalize the brands. There are too many brands, and actually within DDB, it was kind of crazy that you had within Omnicom prior to the merger, you had DDB, you had TBWA, and you had BBDO, who were actually pretty similar agencies. They kind of operated in the same way. There wasn't much differentiation between them. They were all pretty good. I think so. The decision was made to lose one of them, which was just rationalization. And like I say, the decision was made by people who don't have any particular affinity to DDB. BBDO was the biggest of the three, and for that reason would kind of make sense to keep it. So you then have the two smaller ones of TBWA and DDB. Apologies for anyone listening to this who is not an advertising person, because we have a lot of acronyms coming out. But the guy who was in charge of the advertising agency side of Omnicom was, I believe, a South African guy called Troy. I don't know his. It's got a strange surname, so I won't try and say it because I don't want to upset him any more than I am.
I'll put it up as a caption. Don't worry.
So he was in charge of the three of the advertising agency side, and presumably he was charged with getting rid of one of them, and he'd worked at TBWA. So he'd got relationships there. He'd spent a big chunk of his career there, and I can quite see, in the same way that if it was my decision to make, coming up from DDB, I would probably have, my inclination would be to retire the TBWA name.
See, Paul, this is something I don't understand. Maybe because I started in a small market like Auckland, Wellington, I started, but New Zealand, a fairly sheltered market from the rest of how the politics of advertising works. I think I don't want to suggest that there is no politics. There's politics everywhere in advertising, but I remember, like, yourself, you were the ECD who was I saw as he's the guy who knows funny, and then you saw Saatchi's, and I guess Saatchi's are the ones who do epic shit, and then Colenso had their own thing. Everybody had their own thing. It wasn't until I left New Zealand I realized, oh shit, the name on the door doesn't mean anything when you move to another market. As in, just because DDB may be known for doing really funny stuff in New Zealand, it didn't mean I later found out that DDB will be the one that does things like that, even though they're sharing the same McDonald's, your Volkswagens, whatever it might be at the time. And I don't understand how we've all with how central, I mean, with holding companies, how it's all, we've got 200 offices around the world, but they're really not the same. I remember talking to a peer of yours who's in Auckland, the person I mentioned earlier, who was saying, I work with this network, but I would never work for another office of this network. And I think, but then what's the point in many ways of even having those 3 letters, 4 letters, slashes and things like that?
I mean, it varies between different. Sometimes you get unicorn agencies within a global network that are head and shoulders above it, and it comes down to the individual. But I used to go to the DDB global things either at Cannes or we had a brilliant creative directors global creative directors meeting in Berlin, and you'd meet people from around the network, and DDB did have an ethos. It's not that that all the agencies did exactly the same work, but there was a feeling of brotherhood there, I think. And I think a lot of that was driven by the people at the top, who's Ken Case, Keith Reinhardt, and Bob Scarpelli, who were great guys who everybody liked and would uphold the values that as we saw them or as they saw them of DDB, and it was a great time to be there. And I think, like I say, most people were proud of it. I'm sure there are other networks that were full of. There's probably a degree of backbiting and narcissism and God knows what within DDB as well. But it was a good place to work.
I think what I'm suggesting is, number one, anyone who's been in the industry, let's say since the turn of I can only speak for people from the turn of the millennium. A lot of us got our good foundation from holding companies, and some have stayed and some have gone on to start independent agencies. I think it's safe to say the people who you are more likely to succeed with an independent agency model if you've come from a foundational network agency background. I think it would be safe to say that. And I guess the opinion I'm putting forward is, if that is the case, but it's also the case that even though you may see camaraderie between your counterparts in other DDBs at the time, because everybody was kind of still, even though the ethos is there, everybody is still doing it their own way. Like you said, there are some unicorn agencies that just rise from everything else within the network and they make a name for themselves. I think that's what also gave to the rise of how the indie agency is taking over from the network agency model. I think a lot of this is all connected in some ways.
I don't know that the independent model is taking over.
Tell me. Why do you say so?
Well, bear in mind, I've been out of the out of the industry for a while, so I don't know exactly what's going on at the moment. But Special in New Zealand are doing very well. Motion Sickness, interestingly, are an agency that is doing well.
I haven't heard of them. Okay.
Right, check them out. I don't know much about them, but they've been pretty successful, and the guys who run that did not come from a network background at all. But Sarches is still there, and what's left of the Omnicom agency is still there, and Colenso is still there, and the network agencies are rationalising, but they haven't disappeared, and they're just as likely to buy up the independent agencies as happened with us. I mean, partly because you don't have the continuity. If Sarches New Zealand, if the CEO goes, we'll get another CEO if the agency doesn't close.
Okay, yeah, again, it may also be different.
So I think probably wondering what I'm doing. I'm stroking my dog. That's what.
I wasn't looking that far down from your visage, but thank you for that.
Yeah. He wants his dinner. You want your dinner? Yeah.
Soon, buddy. Mine's staring at me from across the room. Let's go for a walk.
Yeah.
Look, maybe this is really because I felt like I had a really lovely start to the advertising world, and it started with big network agencies and the few people, and again, maybe it's people within my particular generation of advertising across different places, not even people who I've really crossed with professionally, but we've seen the winds of change a little bit on how network agencies might have been a place where we wanted to be, but perhaps it's not fulfilling the type of hope, ambition, whatever the things that we need to keep growing the mission. And it feels like independent agencies seem to be doing that because they have, they're starting from the ground up. It's got a blank page. You can do anything you want. And a lot of network agencies are still stuck in their own ways. And again, that might not be happening in New Zealand, but it seems like we're seeing a lot of that elsewhere.
Yeah, but as an individual, as some, if you're a young person trying to make their way in advertising, what you look at what's driving you, what you want to do, what you want to achieve, and who's offering you a job, um, and you go with that. There were certain agencies in London when I was there that everybody wanted to work at. BBH. A lot of people wanted to go to Sarch's. A lot of people wanted to go to Howell Henry. Um, and it was just work. That was all anyone cared about. It was just where can you do great famous work, and that's not necessarily driving everyone these days. By that I mean they might, you want job security. You don't want to work from 8 in the morning till 10 at night all the time. Or as a junior in London, the hours were crazy because you just wanted to be great and be famous, and you were young, and you didn't care. You weren't getting paid anything, but that was the only thing driving you.
I think we are at an age of we're at a time of quantity over quality when it comes to at least
Yeah,
short form advertising,
yeah,
and hopefully that changes, um, unless the powers that be force it to be that way. Someone told me once that it's inevitable for different reasons. Inevitable because outside the sphere of advertising, there are just too many channels. Even if you had enough talent to do it, there isn't even enough time to fill those channels. You will have to rely on the AI to put something in that blank space.
yeah, um, yeah. Conceivably, yeah. It's just it is. It's kind of what advertising did in the first days of TV or radio. It didn't matter what you put in; you just had to put something in, and it took a while before TV ads went from that to be great. I mean, I guess it was a creative revolution with Burnback. The same with print ads. Print ads have been going since whatever, since the printing press, and it took a while for them to get really good. And this is what I used to think about digital, in that we're not using it right. The medium is there, but the create. When it first came along, creative people were looking at all different ways to make use of it in the best way, and it's it shifts. It's like mercury; it keeps moving away from you. And we still haven't worked out the way to use it as best we can. Maybe that will happen, or maybe AI will beat us to it. Luckily, it's somebody else's problem.
Lucky for some, yes.
Some.
Yeah, somebody told me once that it's no. Actually, I saw this online that AI is just going to be like, it's like going into the supermarket, and some people will invariably buy the organic oranges, and some people are okay with the regular oranges, and we're just going to get to a place where some clients just want to sell you regular oranges, and AI is good enough for that. But some are connoisseurs and they want something more artisanal, and we may just become the novelty of the marketing world.
Yeah, well, I mean, the issue comes, like I say, when our AI can do better work than we can, and I would suspect that
That's
that's
not going to
not
happen.
too far away.
Or you think it's not too far away?
Yeah,
I
yeah. It's like, why?
No, but the fact that you think it will get to the point where you don't need to hire a creative director, I think that's what you're getting at.
Not necessarily a creative director. You want, I think you need someone to go yes and no, but you think how long it would take a junior, someone out of straight out of ad school, to do a campaign for a beer brand.
I got you. A
To
competent level of advertising, right? Yeah.
Yeah,
No, no.
it could take months, and AI could do it. At the moment, it will produce an incompetent campaign. So, but it'll probably still be better than the juniors. But in time, it will be better than the seniors.
On that woof of a bombshell, Paul, I'm glad we eventually got around to doing it.
Yeah,
We've had a few.
hopefully this one come out all right.
Yeah, it should be fine. I can see on my side it should be. Well, just leave it on for a bit.
Yeah.
Thank you for that. I appreciate you taking me through a little bit more about the insight of some of the questions I had about the way we were seeing as juniors at the advertising scene in New Zealand, and and even though you weren't involved in the AI version of advertising, glad to hear your opinions on the matter. I hope it takes us longer to get to that point where it replaces the creative director. Fingers crossed.
I think it'll be Christmas probably.
Sorry.
It should be done by Christmas.
I'm hoping you don't get that in your stocking this Christmas.
Yeah.
That wish coming true.
Okay.
Mate, have a good Friday afternoon, evening, happy hour. Enjoy yourself. We'll talk soon.
Thank you. Lovely to chat.
See you, mate.
Bye for now.